Hello, everyone. Hey, Carver. Hey, Jacob. This is Julian. Scott. I work with Scott, by the way. He'll be here in just a second. I see people logging in. This is Julian. It's not Scott. Scott will be joining in a second. I work with Scott Sambucci. So just hold tight. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Hey, Scott, are you there?
Yeah, man.
Hey.
Loud and clear. I am here. Go ahead and pause the recording. Probably see two of me. There's a picture of me, and then there's the real live me. So first of all, if you would, that real live me you can see is actually not me. That's my evil twin brother, Julian Herrero. So he's on the team here at Sales Qualia, and he's going to be manning the controls for the webinar. So first of all, I would really, really appreciate it if you would. If you can hear my voice and see me and my screen waving my arms, I would love it if in the chat box you could just say, hey, I can see you, I can hear you, thumbs up, good to go, whatever it is. That way we can make sure that we get all the technical stuff rolling before we go ahead and get started. So secondly, hey, Cherry, good to see you. And so secondly, I'm actually running this webinar from my mobile phone. So I'm using Zoom on my mobile phone. And the reason I'm using Zoom on my mobile phone is because my Mac blew up. And while in a lot of ways it's kind of stressful to have no laptop, it's also been wonderfully liberating to not have a laptop. Of course, it's not as good for Julian and Steven. Steven Anderson is also here on the call, who also works on the team, which means I've had to give more and more stuff to them. So good for me, bad for them, but works out in the end for me on the net positive. So we're going to start off officially in just one more minute. I know we're at the top of the hour. We've got about 75 minutes or so, a little more than an hour today. And I've been I've printed out all of the questions that have been submitted for today's live Q&A. And I've done my very best to kind of group those because not surprisingly, many of the questions that you all have submitted are in a lot of ways very similar to each other. Lots of questions around prospecting and pipeline and pricing and hiring and managing. So in a good way, we'll be able to knock out, I think, a good chunk of the questions that have been submitted. We probably had 50 or so questions that were submitted. And so what I've tried to do is group those, and I'll talk about that a bit more. So last thing I would love for you to do before we officially get started, in the chat box, if you would, just let me know what time of day it is and where you are in the world. We've had folks that have signed up everywhere from India to here in the States to Europe and Scandinavia. So I would love to hear what time it is and where you are. So we got somebody, hey, Johannes, good to see you. Sweden, Florida, New York, London, Turkey, San Francisco. Hey, Krishan, good to see you. San Francisco, lots of hot. Yeah, hi. Good. So the last thing, Julian, if you would. Hey, Jacob from Portland. I was just in Portland, Oregon. It's one of my favorite cities in the whole wide world. My sister lives there, went to Lewis and Clark, never left. She's now been there for 10 years. And I spend a couple of weeks up there every summer. Beautiful place. I love it up there. Yes, wildfires. Well, you should come to California if you want to see some wildfires. I'll see you a wildfire and raise you 20. So Julian, if you would, I just want to also make sure that my screen, that everyone my screen is maximized, so that, because in just a moment, what I'm going to do is sketch a few things out on the whiteboard to get us kickstarted, to kind of set the table. And then from there, we'll go into some of the questions. So
yeah, your screen looks good, man. Yeah.
Everything good? Okay, awesome. Cool. Well, I'm going to take one last sip of coffee and we will get this thing launched. So officially, welcome to the live sales Q&A with yours truly, Scott Sambucci. As I mentioned at the very top of our launching the screen here, you'll see two of me on the screen as a panelist. So the other Scott Sambucci is Julian, who's going to be working on looking at your chat messages. And the more interactive we make this, the better. So as I'm going through some of these questions, if something's not clear, you want me to go a little deeper on something, if you think, I'll check in with you guys on lots and lots of times just to make sure we're good to go and that everything makes sense. If you have any additional questions that at the end, if for whatever reason we have some more time, you can use the chat box for that. So just use the chat box as our window of communication to get from where you're sitting anywhere in the world, from places like Turkey and India and Portland to me here in Northern California. The second thing I want to do before we get started is everyone should have received a copy of the worksheet. Julian, do you have a link to the PDF that you can just post just in case?
Yep, posting it now.
Get a copy of that. Okay, cool. And the reason I like using that worksheet is because if you're anything like me, I oftentimes can get kind of lost in my laptop. And when I get lost in my laptop, I find there are actually no really good breakthroughs there in my laptop. Where I do all of my best work is using pens and markers and just getting ideas down. If you could see my desk right now, you'd see a stack of Post-it notes and ideas. And so every time I'm thinking through problems or I'm thinking through models that I want to build, I've always found that I'm much more productive when I'm just writing stuff down. So we designed that worksheet. And Julian, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, I'd appreciate it. We designed that worksheet so that you could take notes, so that at the end of the webinar, at the end of this live Q&A, you'll see on the very cover, the very front of the page, there's a place for you to put down some of your actions and insights. And then inside, as we're going through different topics, the way that this workshop is designed is for you just to kind of write down the topic of what we're talking about, or the question that we're tackling. And then just jot down your notes, and off to the side in that worksheet, write down just a couple of key insights for that topic. And then at the end, you can just condense everything and you'll have something really, really actionable. Does that sound good? Can I get a good to go? Does that sound good to everybody? Everybody have the worksheet? Anybody not have the worksheet? Now would be a good time. You don't absolutely have to have the worksheet, but I do recommend having the worksheet. Are we good to go? Can I get a thumbs up? Good to go. Sounds good. Give me a, peace out in the chat box. Sherry doesn't have it. Hey, Rob, good to see you, man. Hey, Fred, thumbs up. Cool. So Cherry, you can either download it or just take notes on a separate sheet of paper. Cool. So one of the things that I promised to you in this live Q&A was to spend most of the time answering questions that you all submitted. And like I said, I've got a ton of questions here that I've already printed out. The second thing that I promised was to go through a couple of really, really simple models. They're simple, and they're also really important as you think about your journey through the life of your startup. And so I'm going to start with just one of them to get going, because I do want to jump into the Q&A part as quickly as possible, because I think this will help us build the foundation for how we've grouped a lot of the questions, and also help you identify exactly where you are on your journey as an entrepreneur, on your journey as a startup, on your journey as a company leader, as a business leader. And so on the worksheet, and again, if you don't have the worksheet, you can just sketch this out. This first model that we're going to talk about is called the startup to scale up model. Startup to scale up model. And the reason we still call it startup to scale up is because in the life of a startup, there's lots of steps, lots of stages, lots of growth that happens. And what I found in working with clients all over the world with startups, helping them, coaching them, helping them to start up, ramp up, and scale up their companies, is that there are these really kind of three distinct phases of startup life. And so that's what these three circles kind of represent. So at the top, the first phase is what we call the startup phase. And so the startup phase is characterized predominantly by going from garage to your first revenue. Garage to your first revenue. And in particular, when you think about enterprise sales, or you're thinking about a B2B product or an enterprise product, what we're really trying to do is find those first 10 paying customers. We're trying to find the first 10 paying customers. Now, that number might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less. If you're selling a very low price product, like a $100 a month product, maybe it's not 10, maybe it's about finding the first 100. If you're selling a very large, like as an example, when I was at Altos Research, we had a $79 a month product, and our company founder sold those first 50 to 100 customers all by himself, working from a coffee shop. Eventually he moved into an office, but he, on his cell phone, people that were doing filling out forms on the website, people that were responding to his blog posts, he was reaching out to those people, setting up calls, doing those demos, and then getting those first 50 to 100 customers all by himself. And that's a $79 package. And then that's when I came on board, and then we ramped that from the first 50 to 100 customers up to the first couple million in revenue. We'll get to that part of the story in just a minute. So for Altos, because we have a $100 product, it was about really the first 100 customers. On the other hand, when I was at a company called Blend, we sold enterprise, and the company still sells enterprise software to banks, and in particular in the loan origination space. And that was a 6 to 7 digit sale. Like we're talking about hundreds of thousands, $1 million of sales. Really, that startup phase for us was really the first 3 or 4 customers. It kind of fluctuates. The purpose here of that startup phase is to get your first paying customers, Now, the reason that's important, if we go down here and think about this growth curve, to get your first 3 paying customers, there's kind of 3 major steps along the way in that journey. There's 3 major discoveries. There's 3 major parts of your sales process, of your company process, that you need to figure out. So the very first thing that we need to figure out is, what is the problem that we're solving? Like in the marketplace, obviously everybody here, you went and started your company, or you work at a startup because there's a problem in the marketplace that you believe that nobody else is either filling that gap or solving that problem appropriately. So when we're first starting our journey as a company, we have to have an idea of what the problem is. The second thing we have to have is identify who are our customers. Who are the people that have this problem? And specifically, what industry or niche or vertical, and then within those industry, niche, and verticals, what kind of companies have this problem? And then even further, when you get all the way down to it, who are the buyers? Is it the VP of sales? Is it the CIO? Is it the chief technology officer? Are we selling to the head of product? Is it an operations person? So we need to know the industry, the companies, and the people. Those all are ways to think about customers. That's the second step. So we've got the problem, we found our market, The third thing we need to do, as I mentioned, is generate revenue. And I know a lot of us feel like the amount that we're charging for our product, especially at early stage, we oftentimes end up undercharging, massively undercharging relative to the value. But most importantly, what we're going to do is generate revenue. And that's why it's the first 10 paying customers, not the first 10 users, not the first 10 people on the platform, but paying customers. And that effectively, once you figure out the problem, the customers, and the revenue, that gets you, that's sort of the three kind of main hurdles or obstacles that you've got to figure out on that journey as a startup, right? So that's phase one. Any questions so far? Are we good to go? Can I just get a quick virtual head nod or a thumbs up? Because I want to talk about the next two phases in just a minute. Good to go. Thumbs up. All right. Awesome. All good. Sweet. So the next phase of growth, once we've got those first 10 paying customers, we enter into, or you enter into, what's called ramp up mode. And ramp up mode is typically characterized by getting to that magic $1 million of annual recurring revenue. So if your first 10 customers, you're just trying to get some revenue, you're trying to prove that people find your product valuable, the problem is important enough that they're willing to spend money to solve it. The ramp up is all about getting to $1 million of annual recurring revenue. And again, it's just a benchmark. And it's a benchmark that oftentimes, I'm sure many of you have heard when you're working with investors, where they say, look, if you want to get a Series A, you're going to have to get to the $1 million of annual recurring revenue. And that's why it's called the ramp up. You're taking what you've learned in the earliest stages of your growth in the startup phase and now applying it to ramp up sales. And the reason that the investors are looking for that $1 million, it's not that $1 million is magical because it's 7 digits. The $1 million in annual recurring revenue is proof that you have systems in place. You have a sales model in place. You have a sales process in place. And that leads us to the three kind of major steps along the way, or the three obstacles that you've got to overcome as part of that journey. So step number one, as part of that ramp up phase, is getting really, really clear on your prospecting. What is that prospecting plan of action? How are you going to fill the top of the sales funnel? And we've got tons of questions all around prospecting, lead generation, drip campaigns, all that stuff. Like, how are we going to fill the very top of the sales funnel? That needs to have some repeatability in it in order to get into the ramp up mode. In the earliest stages, you can rely on network or introductions or investors or advisors or people you know from the industry. Maybe you get some lucky inbound leads, or maybe you bump into somebody at a conference that happens to be an innovator or an early adopter. You're like, great, I sold it to that company. I have no idea how that happened. And if you've ever been in that situation, it's both great and a little bit worrisome. You're like, we have this awesome customer and I can't figure out a way to replicate how to find that customer again. And that's the whole point here, is that when, as an investor looking at the company, what they want to know is, do you have a prospecting plan of action that says, here's the dial, we're going to do these 2 or 3 or 4 sales activities, and that's going to generate qualified leads into the top of the funnel. The second thing you have to have in that ramp up phase is a robust sales pipeline. So having deals that are qualified, so they're through the top of the funnel, and now they're actual sales opportunities. You identified a real need, you know they have some budget, the people that you're selling to are the right people, the decision makers. There's a path to go from first conversation to sale in the next 1 month or 3 months or 6 months, depending on how long your sales cycle is. And I know there's a couple of questions today about how to deal with long sales cycle. And so again, you think about it from a repeatability standpoint, you want to be able to look at the business and say, this is my sales pipeline. I had some leads that came in back in June, and now they're in stage 3 of my sale. I had some leads come in July. We're just doing our qualification calls now. And I've got some leads actually that came in April and May, and now we're in contract and we're about to go live here in Q4, right? So again, it's about repeatability in that process. And then the third piece here in the ramp up phase is all around pricing and conversions. I oftentimes call this paying customers, right? So this is where in the first stage, in startup phase, it's just about like get money, get $1, get $100, get $1,000. Just cross what Anthony Tejan calls the penny gap. You just want to cross over and get some money in order to show that there's value that's being created for your product. When in the ramp up phase, you want to get some repeatability. You say, oh, for that customer in this market, this is how we charge. it's $10 a seat for the platform. We also charge a setup fee of $10,000 and an ongoing professional services fee of $10,000 per year. You've got something really, really clear as a pricing model that's repeatable, so that as you're looking at your pipeline, you have some predictability to say, okay, we have these 20 deals in the pipeline. These 5 should close in the next 3 months, and they should close at X dollars. So that gives you some visibility as to what the future looks like, not just what's happening today. And those are the really what, at the end of the day, the investors are asking you when they say, hey, have you hit $1 million in annual recurring revenue? What they're asking is, do you have a prospecting plan of action? Do you have a pipeline management, a pipeline pull-through system? Do you have a really clear pricing model and a way to convert and retain your customers? Right. So those are kind of the 3 big steps along the way in that ramp up phase. And then finally, if you get to that ramp up phase and you close that Series A, whether it's at $1 million or $5 million of recurring revenue, you get that big, here's a bunch of capital. The reason that you're getting that money, the reason that the investors are investing in you, is so that you can get to that 3rd stage, which is scale up. And the scale up is basically thinking about that million and then 10xing it, and 10xing it again. But for ease of purpose, we'll say the scale up is to getting from $1 million to $10 million in annual recurring revenue. And so when you're in that, now you're in that scale up mode, what that means for you as a company founder, as an early stage startup team leader, what that means is that you have different challenges ahead of you. And the 3 challenges and the 3 kind of big obstacles that you have to figure out in the scale up phase. One is, what are your metrics? What are the key activities that your team needs to be driving on every single day? What are the KPIs, the key performance indicators that matter most for your business? Because now you're not doing a lot of the selling anymore. You're extracted out. You've got a team of people. Part of the reason you got that money is so you could hire a sales team, a marketing team, a go-to-market team of people, or a revenue team of some kind. And so you need to have a way to manage that team and know that, hey, we need them to make X number of calls every day, or we have to have a certain number of leads that come in on a per conference basis. Whatever those KPIs that matter most, because now you're at Command Central. You're not the one in the business anymore. You're sort of on the business. You're looking at it and saying, as the team leader, as the CEO, as the sales manager, in a lot of ways, I have to know what I need to emphasize my team to be working on. And the way I see if they're doing it is by looking at the metrics. Okay. The second piece is you need to get really, really good at hiring. Because when you hire people, whether it's an engineer or a salesperson, right, that hire needs to be able to sit in and make an impact immediately. And bad hires can cost you 6 or 12 months or more, right? So the cost of a bad hire, in a lot of ways, actually outweighs the benefit of a good hire, because it's not just the time and the money, it's the blown leads. So if you have a salesperson sitting there working on leads for 6 months and they're not closing business, or they're not doing their job and hitting their metrics, it's bad enough that you shelled out cash. It's bad enough that you've lost 6 months of time, but now you had potentially hundreds of leads that were part of your prospecting that didn't buy, or that should have bought, simply because you didn't hire correctly. You didn't have the right person in place. And then the third piece here is around management. So team management. What am I doing as a leader of my company, as a leader of my team? What am I doing on a daily, a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis to manage my team, to make sure that the people I hired are empowered to do the work that they need to do? They have everything that they need. How do I make sure that if they're off course on the metrics that we're driving towards, how do I calibrate their work? How do I train them? How do I teach them to get back on course? And if they're ahead of schedule, how do I help them go even faster, right? So these are a different set of problems that you're going to face as you start scaling up the company. And the reason I love this model so much is because what this starts to do, it shows you kind of the path. I mean, you can see this curve is kind of that kind of hockey stick growth that everybody's looking for. And if you go back to the start of this model, one of the things that's interesting, if you treat the x-axis as time, right? The data supports that, or data shows that, each of these phases can take anywhere from 12 to 36 months. It could be anywhere from 1 to 3 years, sometimes even longer. David Cummings, who started Pardot, who he sold to Salesforce a few years ago, he did a blog post recently that he said product market fit can take as long as 4 years. So this early stage, this startup phase, I mean, it takes a long time. And the thing that's kind of a bummer about it is that if you think about the growth of your company, you're spending a lot of time, but you're actually not getting very much growth. And that's why what happens here is a lot of startups, if they never get out of startup phase and into ramp up phase, this is where they get here and they don't get through and they just die off, right? Because they never got enough growth over that period of time where they burned up whatever angel capital or seed capital or friends and family money, or just ran out of time, right? The good news is if you can get through that phase and into ramp up phase, now what you start to see in that same period of time, 12 to 36 months, 1 to 3 years, right? Roughly the same amount of time. If we go and look at the growth, you see that the distance here, the amount of growth that you're making is actually much bigger. It's still kind of small. You're putting a lot more time and effort than you are getting benefit, but you're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so this is a place where a lot of startups, they start to get to $1 million in revenue. They haven't quite unlocked the repeatability and the scalability. And one of two things happen. Either they get here and they start to kind of level out, or they get here and eventually they do die out. So this is a case where some of you may have heard of the term never-ending startup mode. It's like I'm in this, I call it sales purgatory. It's like I've got some customers, I got some revenue, I've got a team, I got like $1 million in revenue, but I can't quite get out. I can't get into that scale-up phase. I don't have the story is not good enough. The model's not good enough to get the investment capital I need to really, really scale this thing. And there's plenty of companies that, end up, maybe they level out or they kind of grow incrementally. And there's nothing wrong with that. I assume though, many of us, when we started our companies, you didn't start your company to get to $2 million in revenue and kind of be good with that. Many of us want to make the impact that we want to make in the marketplace. We want to get into that scale phase. Now, finally, obviously, the third phase, right, in that last phase, that scale phase, the next 1 to 3 years, the good news is when you get to this place and you unlock, these problems, you figure out the metrics and how to hire and how to manage your team, that's where, obviously, the amount of growth that you get relative to the amount of time goes really, really quickly, which is why it's called scale up. And so I wanted to share this model with you because I think it's really important for all of us to think about, like, where exactly are we because when I look at the questions that get submitted in these kinds of, whether I'm doing a live workshop or even when I'm working with our clients every day, sometimes I'll get questions from people about hiring and management metrics, like how do I run the company? How do I hire a team? But truth be told, like they're still trying to figure out like how the hell do I prospect? So this is a later problem. This is a sooner problem. And so it's really important to be really super clear about where you are in your journey as a startup, because these are the now things. And I have a saying that I talk to clients about all the time. I talked about it this morning with a client on one of our group calls. Is like, let's worry about now, or let's focus on now and worry about later. So if you're still trying to figure out how to get leads in the funnel, hiring is not your biggest problem. Like, let's figure this out first so you have a pipeline and you can get the conversions. And once you get to the $1 million in revenue, then hiring is going to be your top priority. So I just wanted you to think about that, because as I was going through the questions that we'll dive into now, one of the things that I did is kind of group those. Most of the questions that I got a lot around prospecting. I got a few around pricing, and then I got a big bunch around kind of metrics and hiring. So I just want to make sure that as you're asking these questions, asking yourself, like, what should I be working on? Where do I need the most help right now? Is really focusing in on the stuff that, based on where you are in the journey, just make sure you're focusing on the now stuff now and worry about the later stuff later. Any questions on that? I know there's a lot of stuff, but I do think it's really important to think about problem customers revenue in the startup phase, prospecting pipeline, pricing and conversions in the ramp up phase, and then metrics, hiring, management in the scale up phase. Questions on this model before we dive into the Q&A and spend the next hour or so doing that? I'm going to take a drink of water. Did everybody just log off there? I got no responses. I have an unusual need for compliments and for audience feedback. Useful model. Hey, Cherry. Yeah, sure. No questions still here. Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's dive into some of these questions, shall we? And so the first group of questions that I want to tackle are on the prospecting side, because that was like a big chunk of the questions that I got. So I'm going to read off a couple of these questions because some of them are related, and some of them are different. So we're going to cover a couple questions on the prospecting side first, and then we'll take a pause, and then we'll move on to the next part of our Q&A. So just to kind of rattle off a couple of these questions. So one question was, how do you keep people warm? Which people do you prioritize to keep warm? What tactics, tools do you keep to keep a connection alive over months while everyone is busy? Here's another one related to drip campaigns, like best practices for drip campaigns, so leads and contacts. Those are kind of like those I'm assuming means I have people in my contact database, and people have come to the website, say they're interested, people I met at a conference. They said, hey, yes, definitely, want to stay in touch, but just not right now. So we're trying to figure out strategies to keep those people warm. Secondly, on the prospecting side, there are questions about like, how do I consistently acquire clients? Good sales question, of course. How do I depend less on marketing dollars? Here's one on user acquisition, best practices to acquire users for a two-sided market. How much or when do you decide to focus on inbound marketing versus outbound marketing? What's the number one acquisition tactic for Silicon Valley companies? What are your thoughts on cold emails and cold calls, or cold emails versus cold calls? And finally, on lead gen tactics in particular, how to go about getting others to refer opportunities for you. Which, by the way, I love that somebody asked that question, because I think referrals is one of the most underused ways of customer development, customer generation, especially for early stage startups. So what I want to do is just kind of tackle a couple of these first. The question about cold emails and cold calls. So this is a question that comes up a lot. And I think the reason that this comes up a lot is because whether the process is doing this cold email campaign or using the phone, there's a question related to outbound versus inbound. I think the trap, and I call it a trap, I think the trap that many early stage startups fall into, those that are in kind of just coming out of startup mode, or maybe still may be in startup mode, and they're trying to grow sales really quickly. Like, you're here, you want to get here. And it's really, really easy nowadays to go find a list of people. You can buy a list. You can go to a mobile app and pull data down. You can go to a conference and beep badges, right? And now you've got all of these email addresses. And most of us, raise your hand, by the way, if this has ever happened to you, say in the last 2 weeks, because I know it has. You've received an inbound email. It's totally cold. And the person is asking you who specifically in your company is responsible for X. It could be who's responsible for recruiting, who's responsible for engineering, who's responsible for product. Hey, who in your company? I found you on AngelList, or I saw your LinkedIn profile, and that you're a company founder, and I wanted to know who in your company was responsible for blah problem. How many people have gotten that email by show of hands over the last 2 weeks? You've gotten at least one of those. And my guess is, unless it's something really, really specific where you need help daily, says Fred, you probably ignored that email, and you're probably a little bit perturbed that somebody just cold emailed you. And so what ends up happening is a couple of days later, because you didn't reply to the first email, that person emails you back again and says, hey, I just wanted to make sure that you saw this email. You're like, yeah, I saw it. I didn't reply for a reason. And then a couple of days go by, and the next email from that person says, hey, listen, I sent you an email. I know you're really, really busy. So if you would, just let me know, A, this is interesting and you want to set up a call. B, this is interesting, but it's not right now and I should contact you later. Or C, you've got eaten by a hippopotamus, in which case I'll call 911, or some semblance of that email in that framework, right? And then you don't reply to that email, and a couple of days later you get yet another email that says, hey, haven't heard from you. I'll just assume that option C is the one that happened. So I wish you luck, and just know I'm calling 911 right now. It's like a 4 email sequence that all of us have seen hundreds of times. And the reason it's really, really annoying is because it never once actually addresses the fact, like, am I the target customer? And so the reason that cold emails and cold calls typically do not work in the early stage is because in many cases, we've either just now starting to figure out product market fit, or we're just still trying to figure out, like, who are the key buyers of our product, of our service. So if we're unclear about the problem that we solve for the people, if we're unclear about the value proposition, if we're unclear of who we're targeting in the first place, then it doesn't matter that you can send out 1,000 cold emails and get 3 responses and say, wow, I got 3 responses. That's really great. I booked 3 meetings by sending 1,000 emails. Well, what about the other 997 people that you did email that didn't get back to you? Let's talk about those people, because either you pissed them off because you sent them a cold email, or they're the wrong people in the first place, in which case you're only focusing on the 3 people that actually booked the meeting with you, instead of learning from the other 997 and saying, that's actually, nobody else has responded to me. And so on the question of cold emails and cold calls, my experience has been that is a scale up phase exercise. Once you have product market fit, once you know who your target customer is, once you know and have tested your message as part of your prospecting plan of action, and you know that, hey, this message in our emails is the one that actually works because we've delivered it and calibrated it hundreds of times, then if you don't know who you're targeting with the right message, then the cold emails are never, ever going to work. And so there's this fallacy that, well, I see all these other people doing cold emailing, so I guess I should do that too. And that's not a now strategy. That is a later strategy. You can cold email people in the scale up phase because, one, you've got more people on the team to manage all of that activity. And secondly, it's assumed that you would have much, much more precision around the people that you're targeting and the problem and the message that goes into that cold email. So if you're an early stage company and you're just now starting to build out your prospecting plan of action, I would say that cold emails, or even outbound in general, in a traditional sense, is probably not the best strategy for that. Instead, what I would say is take that same list of 100 people or 1,000 people that are on your list and look for ways to connect with them and create a conversation with them, and then see if there is a conversion at the end. So one of the ways that we teach this, we actually did with our clients over the last month in August. One of the things we're doing is an entire training just on how to use LinkedIn. I'm going to give you the really, really short version of how to use LinkedIn for lead generation. The very first thing is connect with people. The second thing is create conversation. And the third is then worry about the conversion. Because too many times, whether it's a cold email or even a flat connection request in LinkedIn, people are going for the conversion first. Hey, John, I saw you're the CEO of XYZ company. I wanted to connect with you and see if you're interested in a demo of my product. Like, what they're doing is focusing on conversion without first connecting. And so instead of doing the cold blast of an email, what I would say is get really, really clear on exactly the person that you need to talk to on the other side of the table in order to generate a conversation, a sales conversation. Target those people with a connection request, and then create conversation after you've connected with them to see if there's any interest. Because the conversation is where you're going to do the learning in the sales process. As you're building out your sales process, as you're trying to figure out exactly what is the message that's going to fill the pipeline and get people from lead or name into your sales pipeline, you've got to have as many conversations as possible. So getting 3 out of 1,000 people to respond to your cold email is not creating a situation where you're having a lot of conversations. All it's doing is getting 3 out of 1,000 people saying, yeah, I want to see a product demo. So instead of trying to cover a lot of people with a cold email blast or an outbound blast, instead I would say get really precise. And even if that means doing 20 a day and that's all you can do, then you're going to have a much better conversion rate, and you're going to do a lot more learning by being really, really precise. And then later you can figure out how to automate that stuff. But for now, early stage, get really precise and really, really focused. So that's kind of answers a couple of the questions when it comes to inbound versus outbound, a little bit, as well as the efficacy of cold calls and cold emails. Let me just do a quick pause there and see what questions or what follow-ups you guys might have based on that little answering a couple of those questions. So go ahead and type something in the chat box if you have any follow-up questions. Things are clear. If you want to get some more detail on some of this, this is your time. These are your questions. So go ahead and pop those in there. You're welcome. Great answer. I can see some of the chat. I can't see all of the chats because I'm on my mobile phone, but sometimes I can see little messages coming up. Yeah, Sirkin, good. You're welcome. Nothing, says Cherry. Cool. Okay, cool. So I think what are some strategies? Julian, if you could read that question from Jacob real quick, because I wasn't able to see the whole thing because I'm on here on my mobile phone.
What are some strategies for coming up with good messaging for that more targeted approach?
Oh, for the more targeted approach. So messaging. So the way to think about it is the acronym that was taught to me. Is SPEAR. S-P-A-R. S-P-E-A-R. SPEAR. So SPEAR stands for short, personal, and expect a reply. Short, personal, expect a reply. So the idea of short is if I'm going to send a connection request to somebody, or whether it's on LinkedIn, or let's say I've gone to a conference and I've met a bunch of people. I've walked out of there with a stack of business cards. I'm sure a lot of you have done that. Many of us might be going to Dreamforce, for example, next month in San Francisco. You're going to walk out of there with a bunch of business cards, and you're going to want to connect with those people. You're going to want to follow up with those people. And so if that follow-up message or if that connection request is this big, long message, people just aren't going to read it, right? I mean, I check, especially now that I don't have a laptop, I do everything on my mobile phone. Most of us are checking emails, checking messages on our phone. We're used to really short messages. As soon as I see a long email, then I know it's a sales pitch and I'm just not interested. So you just want to keep it really, really short. Like, be respectful of people's time. If they have a second and a half to read a message, give them a second and a half message. So that's the first thing, keep it short. The second thing is the P stands for personal. Keep personal. So this is where you can only do 20 in a day sometimes, which means, look, if you're in LinkedIn and you've done a search and you say, okay, show me, let's say my target market is the buyer of my product is a VP of marketing at companies that are 50 to 150 employees in the technology sector. So I've done that search and now I've got, say, 100 results on LinkedIn. Well, what that means is you're not going to just go connect and send impersonal messages to those people hoping they accept your connection request. What that means is you're going to have to go to their profile and read about them and see what maybe they gave a presentation at Dreamforce last year. Read about press releases, read about their product, read about their company, read about their work history, and send that in a personal request. Oh, hey, John, saw that you and I both know John Bishke over at Intello. He's a good friend of mine. I've been reading a lot about your company, XYZ, and I also saw the presentation that you gave at Dreamforce in 2017, loved it. Because we have a bunch of mutual connections, I thought that it might be a good idea for us to connect. And if you'd ever love to chat and swap notes, then I'd be up for that. Thought we might connect in the meantime. So that's something that's really, really personal. And like, there's some people here on this webinar, that's how I connected with some of you. That's how some of you got to know who I am, because I went through and we got really precise. I'm like, these are the people in my world. These are the people I want to get to know. These are the people I want to help and serve. And so it's not about hitting 100 connection requests and saying, oh, done. Saying like, no, this person looks like the kind of person I can help. And so I'm going to send that personal message. I've been reading about your company. I saw that we have these mutual connections. So make it personal so that when that person is getting bombarded with messages every day and they see that yours is different, that's when it's going to make them much more likely to respond. And then the EAR is just expect a reply. So I think it's just a really simple ask, which is like, hey, if you're up for it, thought we might connect. That's expecting a reply. If it's somebody from a conference that you got their business card, it's like, hey, really good to meet you at the booth. Was checking out a lot more about your company. Saw that you actually gave a presentation at Dreamforce. When you and I chatted, we talked about grabbing 15 minutes over the next couple of weeks. So are you still up for that? Or if you have a calendar, please send it. I'll be happy to book it at a time. Does that sound good? Ending with a question. Does that sound good? Would you be up for that? Did you still want to connect? Would you like to chat? That's expecting a reply. So that is much more conversational. That's the way we all talk to each other. So why not communicate that way in email or LinkedIn or even text messages? I followed up with people using text messages after conferences because they get 100 emails from all the people that beep their badges. So I've got their card, it's got their cell phone number on it. Hey, John, Scott here over at Sales Qualia. We chatted on Tuesday at lunch. Really good to meet you. Just wanted to send you a text so you have my cell phone number. Oh, by the way, I'm going to shoot you a connection request over on LinkedIn. Thought we might connect there as well. Would that be okay? That's how you talk to people, right? That's how we talk to people every day. It's how you talk to your sister or your mom or your cousin or your friends. Like, so let's not turn this into like sales talk versus real life talk. Like, this is real life. So, you know, the person on the other side is human. So let's be human. Let's speak human to them. So if you just follow this basic premise of short, personal, expect a reply, this framework was taught to me by a guy named Taki Moore, who he's a business coach down in Australia, who I've worked with. And it's been really, really useful for me. And it's just, you'll find that your reply rates go way, way up. So, so I hope that answers the question that we had, the follow-up question there. Thanks for sharing that, Julian. Appreciate it. The other prospecting questions were things like, how do I spend less money on marketing dollars? Or what's the best practices for drip campaigns to leads and contacts? The other one that was related to this is, hold on a second, I have it here. So it was drip, spend less on marketing dollars, and I think that was, yeah, when and how much to do inbound versus outbound sales, because this is related as well. So when you're thinking about, this idea of drip, whether it's drip to a list of people that have come to your site, and I know like a lot of the teams that we're working with, we got a couple teams right now in our 100-day sales accelerator program. It's a 100-day program that we do. We run it 3 times a year. We've got the next one starting in September. So we've got a group that's been running through this summer. And one of the sort of the biggest opportunities to get some leverage in that 100 days for them to help them boost their sales is going back and looking at the contacts that you already have in your database. And database, I use that term, small d, database. It could be that you have something like MailChimp or ActiveCampaign or HubSpot, or it could just mean people that you have in your Gmail, where you could just export contacts. There's usually lots and lots of gold in those contacts, because people that may have come to your website 6 months ago or a year ago, or people that you emailed even 3 months ago, are all opportunities to resurface and see if maybe now is a better time, for a couple of reasons. One, for them on their side, they may have said, interested, not right now, get back to me, looks cool, but not for us. And in which case, maybe things have changed in 3 or 6 or 12 months. And for you on your side, if you think about how quickly your company is changing, I think of startup years like dog years. Dogs have 7 dog years in 1 human year. And your startup is probably a lot like that. You're trying to do 7 years of work in 1 calendar year. So if you just take a moment right now, it's August 16th. If I just say, hey, go back 3 months, go back 6 months to early spring, and tell me, what was your product like? What was your messaging like? Who were you talking to? What have you learned since then? There's probably been a ton of stuff that's changed. And so a friend of mine named Lincoln Murphy, a lot of you guys might know him. He's a customer success expert. He was on my podcast a couple of years ago. And his view on it is, look, if you haven't seen the product in the last 3 months, you haven't seen the product, right? And so if you've got this drip of people, if you've got this content, then you have an opportunity to resurface those people. So the one thing that you can do is to make sure that you're consistently sharing important content with them. And that content, this is a model that we just taught in our training. It's called them, that, us. So it's them, that, us, or in your case, you, right? And the cycle works like this. Because as a startup, you've got limited time and limited resources. So you don't have a bunch of time to sit down and write huge blog posts that are going to go out to the marketplace. You don't have time to sit down and do a webinar like this in a lot of cases. But what you can do is, from a content standpoint, the them represents your customers, like your market. And if you go out and just log into LinkedIn right now, or log into Twitter or wherever you get your information, there are tons of articles that your target customers, your target market, they themselves are publishing that. That's content that you could then share with your list, your tribe, your group of people, your connections on LinkedIn. If you see a target customer, somebody that's in your market that wrote a really cool white paper, why not share that with the rest of the people in your community? It's a way for you, one, to show that person that, hey, you're paying attention to them and you're helping them promote their white paper. But two, it's an opportunity for you to share content with your group without you having to create the content, right? So them using their content as a way to market and a way to stay in front of your people. And those could be just simply reposting stuff on LinkedIn, or it could be doing just a quick digest, like maybe once a week or once a month. My friend Tristan Cromer, his company is called Chromatic. And one of the things he does is a digest of lean startup articles. He doesn't write those articles. He just goes and finds 4 or 5 articles that are really, really good. And he just puts those in an email and sends them out, right? That leads to the that. So that's where you go, hey, so them is a source of content that you can drip out. The that is what's going on over there in the third party. So it could be around conferences. It could be around events. It could be about other third-party content. It could be about things like if you're in an industry with lots of compliance or regulatory changes. I was in the banking sector for a long time, and a lot of times the best way to communicate with customers is just to talk about compliance and regulatory changes, because that's the stuff they're paying attention to. We didn't write that content, but again, we shared that content, drew people to it. Somebody from the Mortgage Bankers Association did a big event, a big webinar about a compliance change. And all we did is took that and then promoted it to our list and said, hey, by the way, if you didn't see this from the Mortgage Bankers Association, it's going to be really good. We know the guy that's going to be presenting. You're going to make sure you see it. We got like tons of people like, wow, I didn't even know about that. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. So there's the them, the that, and then us. And that's where you can talk about yourself. So if you have your own blog posts, if you have your own white paper, if you're doing, webinar, if you're going to be at a conference, you're going to be speaking at an event. So this rotation of them, that, us, them, that, us, or them, that, you, it's an easy way to generate lots of content you can then drip out and share with your list. And a lot of times, because those people haven't heard from you for so long, once you start sending it content back out to them, that's going to oftentimes wake up the list. And as part of the you, having a CTA, a call to action at the end of your email, it's like, oh, by the way, if you want to learn more about how the product has changed in the last 3 months, click here, and I'd be happy to set up a call with you. So even if you have 500 people in your email database, then just using this process and starting to send content out to them is a really, really simple way to start filling the top of the funnel, because the people who are ready or are interested are going to raise their hand. And even if it's 5 people, those are people that you already did a lot of the heavy work with 6 months ago because you first got to know them already. So it's a way for you to fill the funnel with people that are now ready and kind of unearth. It's like shaking the trees a little bit and see what falls out. So it's a really, really simple way to take the list that you have and also drip out to new people that are coming in by using this them, that, us model. So let me just pause there because it's a bunch of stuff on prospecting, and then I want to shift over to a couple of other parts of the sales process. In particular, we had some folks who were asking questions around pipeline and pricing. So I want to make sure to cover some of those questions too. Justin saying, what tools do you recommend? Is that right, Julian? It flashed on my screen for a second and it disappeared.
Yeah, what tools do you recommend for them?
Yeah, so Julian, I'll flip that question to you because you run all those systems for us here. What are 2 or 3 systems that you use that you recommend? Because we've tried out lots of stuff.
I think he means the them part of the content rotation.
Okay. Justin, are you talking about specifically like platforms that you want to use, technology platforms, or are you talking about?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. How to run emails? Yeah.
ActiveCampaign is really really good. Email marketing
campaign.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Lead pages.
So So Lead Pages is good for a landing page. Active Campaign is good for email campaigns, pretty lightweight. And frankly, even if you don't have either of those, while it's not ideal, you could even use like a Google Mail Merge function. If you're just taking emails, if you do them in small batches, then you could say, I'm going to send 50 emails at a time and send out some content to some people. I would recommend, though, using some kind of email system, whether it's Active Campaign. We've also used MailChimp in the past. Works really well. They all pretty much do the same. But definitely recommend some kind of system so that you can monitor things like open rates and click rates and those kinds of things. So those would be the easiest ones to use. Yeah, you're welcome, Justin. No problem. By the way, while I'm thinking of it, I mentioned that 100-day sales accelerator because we have one that's kicking off in September. We're inviting teams. We're taking applications now, and I know some folks and I have on this call have talked about it, and some other people have asked me about it recently. So if you're interested in just learning how that works and getting some more information on that, you can just type the word one or just the word, type in the number 100 in the chat box, and then we can just send you a private message and talk to you about how that works and whether or not we think you'd be a good fit for it. We'll take it from there. So, okay, so let's jump over to pipeline, because there's a couple of pipeline related questions that I wanted to go through that I think are really, really good. One of them here is from Serkan from DataPair, and one of the questions is in B2C, like in business to consumer world, right? There's a North Star metric that oftentimes people use, and that's like user logins or number of app downloads and those kinds of things. The question here, is there a similar metric like that in B2B sales? If yes, what are they? Another related question on the pipeline side is, how much do you handhold early customers through the sales process versus focusing and attracting more leads? So that's a resource thing. Like how much time do I spend working active deals and helping existing customers versus spending time filling the top of the funnel? What's the other one we have here? How do we decide if we're dealing with long B2B sales cycles or if we're wasting our time? Because certainly if you're selling B2B, especially the bigger the company, the longer the sales cycle can be that you're selling to. Another question is, what's a reasonable conversion rate for sales in the education sector? So, we've got our metrics that go from, demo to close, but I don't know if that's good or bad. So these are kind of pipeline related questions. And I should mention, like, we talk about prospecting, pipeline, and pricing and conversions. So I think it's a good time to kind of sketch this out. I've shared this on other webinars in the past. But if you think about the sales funnel, if we just break it into three simple parts, it's those three parts, right? It's prospecting, which the job of prospecting is to get, you want to get people into the top of your sales funnel. So up here, you're doing some kind of marketing or some kind of inbound or some kind of, it could potentially be outbound. What you're doing is pulling people into the funnel, and what the end result here is, what you want is the number of qualified leads, right? This is just a number that you're tracking. How many qualified leads are we generating every day or every week or every month, right? The second piece is the pipeline piece. So now that we have a qualified lead, how many of those leads do we convert into the sales pipeline? And then, whether we have a 2 or 3 or a 5-step or 15-step sales process, how do we march them through our sales pipeline? And what's the conversion rate from pipeline into, becoming our paying customers? So if prospecting is just a number, how many qualified leads, the pipeline, what we're measuring here is conversion rate from how many leads that come in, how many qualified leads do we convert into the pipeline, and then how many of those pipeline deals, when we get to the end, actually convert to becoming paying customers. And then ultimately here, what we're measuring is dollars, revenue. Sometimes people think of it as average revenue per user or average revenue per customer. And, average contract value, ACV, is another term that you hear out there. And so if you're thinking about like the whole sales process, and in particular, this middle part, the pipeline piece, the metrics that really matter are, think about the amount of time or effort that it takes to generate your qualified leads and how many of those qualified leads are moving into your sales pipeline, meaning two things. So there's two mistakes that oftentimes end up happening. So one mistake that happens is you have somebody that you put into your sales pipeline that is actually not qualified. They say that they're interested, or they say that they're going to buy this stuff, or they say there's this need, but they actually haven't passed the test of being a truly qualified lead. And so there's an age-old framework, and a lot of people have different perspectives on this. The one that I've always used is BANTS. So it's budget, authority, need, and timing. And in order for a lead to be a qualified lead, they have to check all 4 boxes. 3 out of 4 is not good enough. If you have budget, meaning money to spend, you have authority, the person can pull the trigger. There's a need that needs to be filled, but there's no timing, there's no urgency, you're not going to get a sale. In fact, we just had a client who was going through this with an existing customer who said, look, we want to go resurrect this old product. Can you help us, with this? And they went through the whole sales process. And at the end, their customer said, hey, this is really useful. Thanks so much for putting together that work proposal for us. We decided we're going to hold off for now. So they were interested. They had budget. He was dealing with the top of the organization. They clearly had a need. They wanted to resurrect this whole product, but there was no urgency here, right? Now, on the other hand, you could have somebody with authority, somebody with a real need, and somebody with urgency. But if literally there is no budget, then you don't have a qualified lead. So one of the 2 biggest mistakes we oftentimes see is that you have a lead, you pull that lead into your sales pipeline that is not actually qualified. The second problem, which is a lot of times even worse, is when you have somebody who could have been a qualified lead, who really is a qualified lead, but you didn't get them thoroughly convinced to enter the sales pipeline. They said, like, oh, this looks pretty interesting, but I'm not sure. We'll come back, hit me up and we'll come back to it some other time. So let me just fix my screen here.
It's all good.
Okay, we're good? Okay,
yeah.
Appreciate it. I get all kinds of funky stuff that happens on the mobile phone. So that's why when you're looking if you're thinking about long sales cycles, a lot of times we have long sales cycles because we started off with somebody who's unqualified in the first place, or we've got somebody, for example, that has potentially there's budget, there's a need and there's urgency, but we're dealing with the wrong person. We're dealing with somebody that's too far down in the organization. And the long sales cycle happens because we have to kind of like sell to the lower part of the organization, and that could take a couple of months. And then finally they go, okay, this sounds really great. Let's go run it by our CEO and see what they think. And you're like, oh crap. Like I thought we were done. I thought we were about to get to the sale. And so you have to start all over again. Or if there's no real need, you could be doing lots of meetings and getting passed around and doing lots of demos. And they go, oh, you should show this to Joe in IT. And you should show this to Maria, head of marketing. And you spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing all these demos and doing all these meetings, only to find out that they're actually not ready to pull the trigger. So whenever you have really, really long sales cycles, it's frequently because we don't have a qualified lead. Because if somebody is in pain, they're going to want to solve that sooner rather than later. So your job in the top of the sales funnel, when you're dealing with conversions from prospecting from your qualified leads into pipeline, is to make sure that the people that you're dealing with, on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 meaning like, this is a huge problem. We got to freaking solve this right now. It's August 16th. I got to have something in place by Q4, or I got to have something in place by the end of the year because it's part of our strategic objectives. And if we don't get this figured out, 2019 is screwed. You got to need somebody who's a 4, not somebody who's a 1, which is like, oh, this looks interesting, but I think we're good. Or a 2, which is like, yeah, I know it could be better, but we've got this SharePoint site that we use, or there's this other app we've been using for a while, or our internal IT team built this app and it seems to work pretty well. That's a 2. It could be better, but a 3 is like, okay, yeah, I guess this could be a pretty big problem, but it's not top priority for us. We've got these other 3 things we got to do first. So if somebody's a 1, 2, or 3, they don't have urgency. They're not going to take action. So your job to shrink sales cycles is to make sure the people you're dealing with are a 4. And that's part of the sales qualification process around budget, authority, need, and timing. So this relates to, the reason I wanted to sketch this out is because 2 things. 1, it helps with shrinking the the sales cycle, because if you have truly qualified people, the sales should go fast because people in pain are going to want that solution sooner rather than later. And secondly, there's a question around like, what are the North Star metrics that I should be tracking as part of my sales funnel? And so that's where I use these three numbers. How many qualified leads are you bringing in? Whether that's, and you can think of that as sometimes people think that as your customer acquisition costs. Like, what does it take to get from lead all the way through to customer? If I have a customer that's paying me $10,000 a year, what did it cost me to get that customer, your customer acquisition cost? But ultimately, you want to know, how many qualified leads am I generating? And that's where, going back to the cold emails aren't really great because you could be blasting out 1,000 emails to get 3 results. And of those 3 results, those 3 demos, you could end up with 0 qualified leads. So yeah, you've done a lot of work theoretically, but you haven't generated any qualified leads. So you want to look at how many qualified leads should you be targeting that's going to help you get to the revenue number that you want to get to. And in between that is starting to tease out your conversion rate. So whether your conversion rate is, from people that are in the pipeline to here, whether that's 10% or 50%, it should be whatever number matters. The only number that matters is the number that's going to help you drive your growth and help you get from where you are to that $1 million threshold, if that's where you really need to go to. Because as long as you're getting some conversions, you can always look for ways to improve that. That's oftentimes one of the places we will spend a lot of time with clients, is looking at things like your product demos. It's like, a lot of times product demos, there's this big song and dance. You spend an hour clicking through stuff. Everybody goes, wow, it looks really great. Send me a 1-pager. Or, wow, it looks really cool. Could you send me a proposal? And you send the 1-pager, you send the proposal, and the deal dies. And it's not that there wasn't sufficient interest. It's that we lost control of the sale. Instead, what we should be doing is saying, here's a not spending an hour on the demo. Let's spend 15 minutes or even 5 minutes showing the product, and spend the rest of the time talking about what the next steps are and what needs to happen in order for you to go from this looks interesting to actually getting it up and running with your target customer. That's going to increase your conversion rates when you have more control, because oftentimes conversion rates die off because your people die out. They stall out. They disappear on you. It's not that people told you no, not interested. If your conversion rate from pipeline to paying customer is 10%, it's not because none of them explicitly told you, no, we are not interested. What usually happens is, of the 9 that didn't convert, maybe 1 or 2 of them said, yeah, not for us. We decided to go with somebody else, or not right now. The other 7 are people that didn't convert because they went completely dark on you, even though they were an inbound lead or an introduction or said they wanted the demo. And so a lot of times that conversion rate can be calibrated. You can really turn up that conversion rate just by introducing ways of retaining control of the sale. And oftentimes the demo is one of the sort of the crucible of that, of those techniques in the sales process. So I wanted to kind of tackle both the metrics questions. Think of it as total number of qualified leads, what's your conversion rate from lead to pipeline and pipeline to paying customer. And then thirdly, the most magical number that you really need to be, the biggest North Star, if you will, is revenue, right? It's not about users or free pilots or how many deals are in the pipeline. Investors don't care about that stuff. What they care about is like, what's your average contract value, what's your ACV, and what's your ARR. That's what they care about. So we just do a quick pause there. Questions you might have. Julian, were there any questions on that piece as I was going through it?
Yeah, so Chris asked, what are the success metrics for email campaigns for prospecting to qualified to pipeline?
Say that one more time.
What are the success metrics for email campaigns for prospecting to qualified to pipeline?
I would say like the metrics are the ones that drive the business. So what I would say is, like, if you're doing email campaigns, the only thing that should be designed to do is get you from list to qualification call. And then from qualification call, if you've done your targeting the right way, then that qualification call conversion should actually be pretty high, right? If you're targeting the right people with the right message, who have the problem that you solve, if you get them on the phone, because they've opted into a call, what they're essentially telling you is like, no, there's urgency here. I have a need here. I want to talk to you about your solution. In which case that conversion rate from that first initial qualification call into your sales pipeline, to me, that should, especially at this stage, early stage, should be really, really high. By really high, it means like 4 out of 5, right? I mean, it should be the exception when you qualify somebody out, right? And as far as getting people from email into the qualification call, that's where I'd go back and say, well, maybe it's less about email conversions and more about how many conversations can you generate. And again, that rate should be really high, because if you're targeting the right people, if you know what problem you solve for the people that you're solving it for, and you're targeting those people on LinkedIn or at conferences, and those are the people you're having meetings with, then that rate should also be much, much higher. So as an example at Blend, like when I was doing meetings all the time at conferences, like our conversion rates were somewhere around 25%. Like 25% of the people that I would meet with ended up in a serious sales conversation, because I was only having like 10 meetings. So I was super focused on the exact right person, and I had the right message. I'd done a ton of research. So by the time I reached out to them, 1, they definitely wanted to take the meeting, and 2, the qualification of meeting the budget authority timing was almost always there, or at least at a very, very high rate. So again, I worry less about like what should be the conversion rate and more about what's the bottom line number that's going to get you to the number of deals that you need in order to drive the revenue that you need to drive. Hope that helps. I want to go through a couple of other.
We have another, it's not so much a question, but a statement from Cherry. She says, we sell to the education sector where budgets are difficult to determine and they rarely have urgency. It's frustrating at times.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Okay. Well, then I would say there could be urgency at one level of the organization, but not urgency at the second level of the organization. So we had this a lot of times in the mortgage area, where we go talk to people in the lending space, like people that are doing loans every day, loan officers, loan processors. Like, oh, my software sucks. It takes me forever to do this or that process, and I'm still sending faxes, and oh my God, this is slowing me down. And you go talk to the executive, you're like, no, we're good. We're all right. Yeah, I know we're using fax machines, but between you and me, I'm paying that person $12 an hour, so I really don't care. Right? So there can be this disconnect. And so if there's urgency at the highest levels, the budget will be created, or budget will be available. And again, using that example from Blend, we had a chief risk officer at a major bank lender who had us come in, and basically the chief risk officer paid for the business team to implement our software. He's like, I have massive exposure, negative exposure in this portfolio of loans. It's like thousands of loans worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I've got to get this fixed because it's a massive exposure of risk to the company. So while the business team might not want to go learn a new software and get that stuff installed, I'm going to tell them they have to do it, and I'm going to pay for it. So if I had to ask the business team, like, hey, do you want the software? They might go, yeah, it looks really cool. We'd love to have it, but we're just like too busy. We don't really care. We can't get budget for it from our SVP of lending, who is their boss. The chief risk officer over here is like, no. This is number one priority. I'm going to pay for this. So if you're seeing need and urgency, but not budget, it means you're probably not moving up high enough in the organization chart to make sure that the people that write the checks understand and see the same level of urgency. Let's see. Go through just a couple more. By the way, this is kind of the first time we've run this format on our webinar. Usually I do like a big long presentation. I'm kind of curious if this has been useful, if you're enjoying this, because we might start running these more frequently. I don't know how often we can do them because we're really tight running our different programs. But if this is useful for you to get some help with some of the stuff that you're working on, then I'm happy to do these as frequently as I can. And if you're, as I said earlier, like if you're looking for more help, we do have that 100-day accelerator program that's kicking up in just a month. So if you feel like you're getting value out of this, then quite sure you get a lot more value out of that. So again, just type in 100 into the chat. We'll follow up with you on that. So let's go. Last thing I want to do because I know we got about maybe just a few minutes left. We've talked a lot about this part of the funnel. That's where a lot of the questions came. The second thing that I wanted to talk through is some of the questions that came around here, like around hiring and managing. And so let me just get to those questions. So one question around hiring is, should I just hire a growth specialist or a salesperson? Another one is, how much of a subject matter expert does our sales staff need to be? How much should I pay for a salesperson? Like, what's that comp program look like? What's the best practices in terms of putting that together? And so the way to think about hiring, it's actually, I'm going to steal to save us time. This is what we call our 12-point. This is our 12-point sales hiring system. And yes, I do have these kinds of things all over my office. So that's why I could just peel one off the wall, because this is how I work best. So if you think about your sales hiring system, there's basically four main components. It starts here and kind of works in this direction. There's four main components of a complete sales hiring system with three kind of checkpoints or three subparts along the way. So the four drivers, or the four main steps or stages of your sales hiring process, is one, define. You have to define the job that you're hiring for. So get really, really specific on the tasks that you need that person to do. So if you're a standalone CEO and you're spending tons of time just doing like lead gen work, then go into your email, go into your calendar, go into LinkedIn and write out all the specific tasks, specifically what you're doing. I'm doing connection requests. I'm following up conference leads. I'm sending out cold emails. I'm following up with leads. I'm doing qualification calls. Like, get really, really, really tight around the tasks that you need the person to do. Then secondly, you need to decide the metrics on how you would decide whether or not that person is going to be successful. So how many calls, or what should the conversion rate be? Or how many demos should that person set up if it's an SDR? And the third thing is, you want to define the persona. Like, what kind of person do you want to join the team? And it doesn't mean that everybody has to be just like you. It just means, like, what kind of culture are we trying to build here? Because there's some, like, when I do job postings, I specifically ask people, hey, if you could be any superhero, who would you be and why? And I've actually had people that submit resumes. They're like, here's my resume, here's my cover. By the way, I really don't understand the basics of that question. So, I decided not to answer it. Like, cool, like, you're excluded. There's a reason that I asked that question. So you just want to know, define the tasks, the metrics, and the persona. So once you have that, then you can go do step two. So this is step one. Step two is then find the people. So who are the people in your network that you can go after specifically directly? Who are the people who can get you access to other people? Where are the places you can go? What kind of events or groups on LinkedIn or other places that you can find the people that meet this definition? And then make this a priority. Because oftentimes what I see is a CEO or a startup founder saying, like, oh, I got to hire the salesperson, and I got introduced to Bill, who was at Salesforce for 20 years. And Bill seems to really know the health tech industry. So I don't know, like, I'll go talk to 2 or 3 other people just in case, but I think I'm going to hire Bill. I'm like, dude, like, you're not making this a priority. Like, making it a priority means, just like selling is an everyday thing, recruiting needs to be an everyday thing. There should be time in your calendar, even if it's 1 hour a week, where you're going through contacts you've made at other conferences, at conferences or events. When you go to conferences, not just meet with people that you want to sell to, like, go around to the booths and talk to the salespeople. Figure out, like, who are the salespeople that you think meet the persona that are doing this job. Be like, hey, I'd love to stay in touch. Like, make it a priority in your day-to-day, week-to-week work to find the right people. Because just like sales, you have to have a full funnel, because those bad hires, like we talked about, can cost you time, money, blown leads, and ultimately can really sink your ship. The third step is then hire. So your hiring process, how are you screening people? How are you interviewing them? How are you assessing their work? And there's all kinds of really specific details on that. But one, screening people out so you're not spending a bunch of time with the wrong folks, just like you would in sales. Interviewing, how are you making sure that you're asking the right questions? And then assessing people objectively using behavioral assessments like We use Zero Risk with our clients. They can use it with all their candidates. There's DISC Profile is another one. To make sure that when you're making that hiring decision, you're making it as an informed decision, not because Bill, who worked at Salesforce or Oracle for 20 years, is really good at interviewing and seems like they know how to do a good presentation. And then fourthly, as part of your hiring process is onboarding, getting your team involved, making sure they have the right training, making sure you have a way to manage that person every day. Because another question that came in is, how much time or how can I outsource the training to a freelancer or to a consultant that's going to be doing some selling for you? Well, the answer is you can't. Like, if you're not willing to manage and train that person and spend the time with them, then that person is going to be, it's 95% of the time that person is going to fail, because they need to understand, how are you communicating with the market? How do you run product demos? How do you qualify leads? How do you talk to people at conferences? What is the systems that you have in place? And if you don't have any of that stuff in place, you shouldn't be hiring somebody in the first place. You shouldn't be hiring a salesperson to help you figure out how to sell. You should be hiring the salesperson to sell for you, following the prescribed model and system that you build as part of your, whether that's on the prospecting side with an SDR, how do you get deals through the pipeline, or how do you make sure that you're managing the accounts the right way? So what I'll do is wrap up this kind of part of the talk here with the metrics, because there were some questions around comp programs. Compensation programs should be directly tied to the metrics that you need them to achieve, because whatever incentive program you set up is exactly the behavior you'll get. And I'll repeat that. Whatever incentive program you set up is exactly the behavior you'll get. So if you set up an incentive program that's designed to reward somebody for the number of phone calls, you're going to get a lot of phone calls. If you set up the incentive program to reward people for the number of booked meetings, you'll get a lot of meetings. Now, it doesn't mean that the phone calls are going to lead to anybody but voicemail. It doesn't mean that the meetings you get are with the right people. So you need to make sure whatever comp program you set up, it should be designed to hit the metrics, not just of that job, but how does that job filter into the overall metrics of the company to make sure that the company is on track with its KPIs. So now, whether you do base and commission and all that stuff, I mean, you can, we did a podcast, actually, we can send it out. Julian, put a note to send this out to folks who want it. We did a podcast interview with a guy named David Chick-Kelly. David is a sales compensation expert. And he talked about, in that startup phase, if you're hiring your first salesperson, you often want to hire what's called a market maker, somebody who has a lot of experience in the marketplace, that you can give them the core frameworks to sell on. Who are your customers? What's the value proposition? How are you pricing this? How do you pay that person for their expertise? Give them a base and then a hefty commission. Pay them to reward. And what they're doing is making a market for you. They're getting you into that ramp up stage as quickly as possible. So be willing to pay well for customer acquisition, because you don't really care as much about profitability in most cases here as you do getting to that $1 million threshold. You can figure out ways to be more economical with your customer acquisition costs down the road. You need to prove that you can sell this first. And a market maker is a way to do that. So let's see. David Chick-Kelly, Cichellli. Let's see. So let's see. Other questions? Are there any other? It's a couple management questions I wanted to cover. Just remember how to manage a remote sales team. What are some strategies to keep SDRs focused on outbound lead generation rather than adjustments to the tools and systems aimed at efficiencies? I come from a COO background, but as a CEO, I'm having to manage salespeople. What suggestions do you have for how I can get better at that? So the number one, when it comes to sales management, and that's, again, that's something you're going to hit, whether, you're scaling and you've got a 10-person or a 20-person sales team, or even here in the ramp-up phase, a lot of you might hire your first sales team person, right? It could be a BDR, SDR, it could be a marketing / salesperson. Like, you've got to figure out how to manage that person or manage that team. The easiest way that I can describe management is with one word. Communication. Communication. And what I mean by that is you need to be willing to invest the time to communicate and over communicate exactly what it is that you want and need from that person. You need to be able to communicate, get that person to communicate from you what they need from you. And so the structure that you want to set up for yourself, you think about a calendar, is a month, right? So we have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then you have, we'll just say weekend. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This is Saturday. Okay. We'll just assume you're not working on the weekends, even though most of you are, I know. So the way to think about communication is in three parts. You want to think about daily, weekly, and monthly. So daily communication means in the beginning of each day, doing what we call a daily sales stand-up. Many of you on this call, most startup founders that we work with are product or engineering people. You know what it means to do a scrum meeting or to do a daily stand-up. And those work really well because it helps you to identify what are you working on, where are you stuck, where do you need help, what are my blockers? Like, that's why you run the stand-up. Do the exact same thing on the sales side. What are you working on? Where do you need help? Where are you stuck? What are the blockers? What do you need from me right now? And this can be a 5-minute Skype call. It could be on Zoom. You could use Slack. Whatever it is, you need to communicate and get that person to tell you where their priorities are. Because if you hire that person, it can be really easy to go, oh, good, I got the salesperson in place. Now let me go worry about raising capital. Let me go worry about product. Let me go hire the next engineer, right? Because the sales guy's got it or the sales gal has got it now, right? All of a sudden, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, you find out that that salesperson isn't doing the work that you hired them to do. Oh, I thought you wanted me to do a bunch of work on setting up the sales funnel in Salesforce. Oh, I thought you wanted me to do a bunch of work like setting up an email campaign. Like, no, I hired you because I wanted you to make phone calls. Oh, okay. So having a daily stand-up and then at the end of the day, doing the same thing. So it doesn't have to be live every single time. You could do like Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning is live. Tuesday, Thursday afternoon is live. The other times are post and Slack. You want to get some visibility. You want to give that person plenty of opportunities to communicate with you, to ask questions, and for you to communicate with them about what they should be working on. So that's step one, is daily. The second is weekly. And by weekly, what you want to have is weekly as a weekly download or a weekly stand-up. So this is like a 30-minute meeting where you just go like recapping the week. This is not a pipeline review. This is different than a pipeline review. This is just a recap of what did you learn? What do we need to work on? What are the priorities for the next week? This is more of an operational meeting. Secondly, you do want to have a pipeline review. You don't have to do it every week. I would say every 2 weeks is a pipeline review. And that's designed to go deal by deal. We have a pipeline analysis worksheet that a lot of our teams use because it helps accelerate this. Just want to have a format that allows you to dive in, look at the pipeline or look at the deals that we're working on, and just review and see what action items there are. So those are the kind of the weekly meetings. Have a weekly 30-minute stand-up. And then monthly. The third thing is a monthly meeting. So that monthly meeting can be at the end of the month, for example. So you have your daily meetings, you have your weekly meetings, and then a monthly. And the monthly is like the weekly recaps that you're doing, but it's a recap of the entire month. It's a recap of the entire month. What have we learned? Where are we going? Again, it's all about you communicating with that person. How have the priorities changed? How are we doing with the product? The product team said, by the end of the month, they were going to have these or that features ready. And I know you've been demoing that stuff in beta mode, but we're behind. Here's what we need you to do. Or, hey, I need you to shift your attention because we just got invited to speak at a conference. So instead of calling that list of people that I gave to you, what I need you to do is go over to this conference website and pull down the list of attendees and set up meetings for that, because that's going to be the main priority for next month. So daily, weekly, monthly, and just focus on communicate on exactly what you want, and make sure that person is really clear on the metrics that they're being driven on, and make sure that you're measuring that person on their metrics that you hired them to do. Because if you don't remediate and you don't hold that person accountable, then you could be 3 or 6 months down the road, that person's not doing the job, they're not executing, they're not delivering the results, but it gets hard to pull them out because you're like, it's not great, but at least somebody's calling the leads. Okay, if somebody's calling the leads, but they're not qualifying them the right way. They're not converting them the right way. You're not seeing results at the bottom of the pipeline in terms of new customers. So the longer you wait to get somebody out or make adjustments, the harder it is. So by doing the daily, weekly, monthly, it allows you to get lots of opportunities to calibrate the work and make small adjustments so you're not, 30 degrees off from your true north. So, so I hope that helps. There's a couple questions around management, and I wanted to make sure we cover that. So listen, we're going pretty hard here for about an hour and a half. I know we're a little bit over from the allocated time. I hope this has been super, super helpful. Like I said, I'll mention it just one last time. If you're, we've got a couple of teams that we're going to be bringing into the next group of the 100-day sales accelerator. So again, if you're interested, you want to learn more, you can either just type the word 100, or if you want to book at a time with Steven on our team. Julian, I think you have his calendar. If you grab a link to his calendar, maybe just put that in the chat box for people if they just want to talk to somebody and find out what this is all about. Grab a time with Steven because he works with all of our teams as well. There it is. Cool. Thanks for doing that, Julian. Yeah, just grab 15 minutes with Steven. He can kind of fill you in with the details, and we can let you know whether or not we think it's a good fit for both of us to take things from there. So that's it for now. We're really appreciate you guys spending time with us today. It's a lot of fun for me. Like I said earlier today, I was on a group call, so I've been in like coach mode all day. So I'm kind of like line me up and let me go. I think we'll probably do this again. I had a good time, and I hope you did too. I hope you learned a lot. Tell a friend. We'll probably run this again. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see how the calendar goes. We're pretty stacked up in September with a bunch of events. But in the meantime, if you do have any questions or any follow-ups, dude, I'm here to help. And if I can get you an answer, then I will do that. And if I can't get you an answer, then I'll help you find the person or place that can get you the answer. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll see you again soon. Talk to you later.